Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We are so excited to have you here in the most amazing lineup of women to talk about how we really stand on the shoulders of giants, the legacy of female leadership in Islam. This event is brought to you by Penny Peel USA, who's been in the business of serving humanity and empowering women and men alike for 5 years now, due to your support. So I want to introduce some of our speakers and then get straight into questions so that we can make the most of our time together. So the first person I want to introduce is myself. My name is Yasmin Elhady. Hey, everybody. You can find me on Instagram at YasGuru. Who am I? What am I? I am lots of things and maybe nothing at the same time. But women are all things. And we don't sit in kind of a box, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. I am a comedian, I'm a lawyer, I'm a relationship consultant, I'm a mother, and I am somebody who cares very deeply about empowering other women. My background is in law. I am currently a practicing attorney, and you can find out more about what I do on the relationship side at YasGuru online and Yas Laughs on YouTube for my comedy page. So I will introduce now our first person on the panel, and that is Dr. Dalia Fahmy. Dr. Dalia Fahmy is an associate professor of political science, at Long Island University, where she teaches courses on U.S. foreign policy, world politics, international relations, causes of war, Islam and democracy, the politics of the Middle East, and she's currently a visiting scholar at the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University. Thank you for joining us, Dalia.
Thank
Professor Fahmy. Thank you.
Not of silence, but of science.
Our next speaker on the panel will be Dalia Mogahed. Dalia Mogahed has been the voice for American Muslims on major media outlets such as MSNBC, PBS, Al Jazeera, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. CNN named her one of the 25 most influential Muslim Americans in 2018, and millions watched her TED Talk, What's It Like to Be Muslim in America? I'm sure you've watched it all. She served on Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships in 2009, advising the president on how faith-based organizations can help the government solve persistent social problems. She's a researcher, pollster, author, advisor, consultant, who is now the director of research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, as she keeps her pulse on her finger on the pulse of all Muslims around the world. Join me in welcoming Miss Dalia Mogahed. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. So good to be with you.
We're so excited to have you. And our final and esteemed panelist and guest is Miss Ndidi Okakpu. She is a community advocate, social entrepreneur, and she drives equity and civic change in community spaces. She's the president emeritus and past convener of the Chicagoland Shura Council, a 501c3 federation of different mosques. She is a community organizer representing the Chicagoland community from the late Muslim American scholar and leader Imam Worth Dean Muhammad's community. She's inspired by community activism of her late mother, Amatullah Sharif, Allah yarhamah fillah ya Rab. Her roots began in Muslim youth organizing in school and the masajid. She took time to be a part of the delegation sent by Imam Muhammad to study Quranic Arabic in Syria. And upon returning to the States, she was appointed the National Youth Coordinator Organizer for the Youth Dawah Training Program. And over an 8-year period, she helped organize and progress the youth moving forward. Ms. Okakpu has written vigorously in the Muslim Journal, often reporting on community, civic, and world events. Her background has called her to serve in areas of civic engagement, including joining the White House Office of Public Engagement, addressing issues affecting marginalized communities, as well as being in a documentary on the contribution of Muslims in America with noted Americans such as Congressman Keith Ellison. Please join me in welcoming Miss Ndidi Okakpu. Alaikum assalam. Thank you so much for holding this space and having the time in your day to talk about these important issues. We want to make sure to give as much time as you all have, in your passion and from your heart to speak about these issues. So what I'll do is I'll ask a question, then ask each of you to give me details about how you feel about answering, so that we all kind of get a chance to get your opinion. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you, illustrious women. First of all, what do you think is the biggest support women can receive from the greater public? And I will first ask Miss Ndidi her opinion on that.
The biggest support that women can receive from who?
From the greater public. So for example, from other women or from men, from the public, what do you think is the most important thing that women need to feel supported in a community?
I would say space, right? Space, autonomy, support, encouragement, freedom, all of these different things. And these are not things that we have to really ask or demand of others. But if people, I guess what I hear the most is women and sisters who are seeking to do work in the community that feel like they need permission to do good works, when the Quran liberates us to do good works and it actually enjoins it upon us to do good works. And you just check your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to affirm that, you know, what it is that you want to do. But when we have the opportunity and we are inspired to create an event, a program, a project, we see a need to just make sure that if people want to support, they can support by stepping aside and allowing space.
Yeah, women to enter that space. That's beautiful. What about you, Dalia Mogahed? What do you think is
You're
the
going to
biggest...
have to keep saying.
Like, Dalia, this...
Just
Dalia,
say
that.
Dr. Dalia and Dalia.
That's perfect. I like that.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that we need as women is the space to be fully human. And here's what I mean by that. We are held to an insane standard of perfection. We are expected to be perfect saints in every way, especially if we are public servants and therefore public figures. And everyone on this call is in that category. We are not allowed to make a single mistake. We're not allowed to be anything other than, you know, perfect. And it's exhausting and very dehumanizing. So it burns us out, and it makes us just want to hunker down into a hole and hibernate and not continue to be out there trying to do the good work we're trying to do, because we're never allowed to fail. We're never allowed to make a mistake. We're never allowed to do something that a few people disagree with in some way.
Do you feel like there's a double standard, Dr. Dalia? You know, from what Dalia is talking about, the first Dalia. Dr. Dalia, do you feel like there is a double standard about that perfection? And of course, I would love for you to answer that question, and then also share what you think we need for greatest support in our community.
Absolutely. And I think first, it's an honor to be with all of you, but it's a way with which we need to understand how we're constantly being perceived. And the perception that we're being perceived through today is very grounded in the kind of Orientalist history of how Muslim women of color, women in general are perceived. And it comes from the kind of temporality of our existence. Why is it that we come from this space? You guys can't hear me, can you?
So we can hear you, but we're getting a little bit of feedback.
I'm not sure what to do.
There it is. It went away.
It went away. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I want to talk about, this kind of temporality of when we see ourselves, or when women is perceived as having these kind of temporary identities that are erased with time. And the reason why I want to focus on this is that we think that this is tied to, for example, hayat, or this is tied to what good women do. They're seen and not heard. And that we're fighting against these kind of cultural constructions, but they're really Western Orientalist constructions of what the place of brown women are in society. And then when you extrapolate on that into how then Muslim communities internalize it, we then internalize the narrative that Muslim women are actually, their entry into space that we're all talking about almost contaminates the kind of male-dominated space. And we need to recapture that definition of the public sphere and where women belong, away from what it's become today, because it's completely antithetical to Islam, right? It's imbibed with that Orientalist still trajectory of which the lens through which we see women. We see women of color, and we see Muslim women and women who are at the intersection of being Black and Muslim and immigrant and indigenous. All of them have it at many multiple layers that we don't. But again, when we talk about space here, I think we need to also kind of look at it big picture, that we are talking about a long legacy that wants to erase the identities and the existence of women, and we've internalized it as we are simply temporal. Right. And the legacy of Muslim women for our purpose today is not infinite. It doesn't come from a long historic legacy. It doesn't come from an indigenous American legacy. And so our space is almost ephemeral. Mm-hmm. And that we actually internalize that that's what good Muslim women are, right?
Yeah, and what's so interesting about what you're saying, I mean, our legacy it should not be ephemeral, it shouldn't be fleeting, and it's not really temporal, because if you think about, the first degree granting institution in the history of the world was Al-Qarawwayn in Morocco, built by a Muslim woman. So, what I want to know is, what kind of lessons from the past can we learn so that we don't have this erasure of maybe the allowance of the space, right? And the allowance of women to enter that space, or perhaps this insane standard, like Dalia spoke about, for perfection. What do you think? And I'll ask Dalia this question. What do you think is one of the first? What is the lesson to learn from the past so we can have a more hopeful future?
Well, I mean, one of the key lessons of the past is female Muslim scholarship. There's a phenomenal book about al-muhaddithat and the women scholars of Islam. And it's one deep dive, not that this is the totality of women's scholarship, but it's one amazing scholars deep dive into the scholarship contributions of Muslim women in one field of study. And many of these muhaddithat, and they weren't like in the dozens, they were in the thousands and the tens of thousands. Many of these muhaddithat were also scholars of tafsir, were also scholars of jurisprudence. So the idea of normalizing, not making it an anomaly, not making it, oh, wow, this is this new phenomena, the first woman XYZ, none of that is true. This is a normal part of our history for women to be scholars of this faith, to which some of our most well-known male scholars were students of.
Right.
So I think this is one thing we need to bring back, is the normalization and the legacy of female Muslim scholarship.
That's really beautiful. I was sitting on a prestigious, in front of a prestigious scholarship, national scholarships judge panel. Okay, so there was a panel of judges. I'm sitting on the receiving end of this. I was a semifinalist for this scholarship in college. And one of the judges felt empowered, maybe is the word, emboldened, I think is the better word. She felt emboldened enough to ask me, well, you've breaking away from the tradition of Islam by being educated. I mean, you look how well you've done in school. Why haven't you breaking away, she didn't say because she was Southern, breaking away from the tradition of this. And she went like this. Wow. Around her head. I lost the scholarship in that moment when I answered her. When we talk about the muhaddithat, I said, with all due respect, over 40% of the ahadith, right, the traditions, I got my son here, sorry, that just rolled in. But 45% of the women of ahadith in the scholarship books of Imam Ahmed, for example, they were all women. 45%, have women in the narration chain. And from that, we know that none of them were considered liars or had their trustworthiness questioned. So what you're saying, Dalia, really resonates with me personally. And I wanted to ask you, Ndidi, what do you think we can learn from the past to embolden us for the future? In a good way, not in a negative way. Try to make it positive.
I mean, when you mentioned the point about the legacy is, to me, it's not ephemeral. Our legacy starts with Hawa, right? With Eve. Our legacy starts with, it continues on to Hajar, right? And to Khadija, radiallahu anha, right? And Sumaya, right? The first martyr, right? Our legacy is eternal, right? It's beyond, it's from the start of mankind. But one of the things, actually, I just did a talk with Ta'leef Collective about, we went over the purification of the heart that Sheikh Hamza used to translate. And I want to read this quick little tidbit that of our foremothers. So, because there's this concept that it ties into what you were saying earlier too, in regards to the modesty, right? We have this concept of hayat, religious modesty, right? And we as Muslims, we want to tread lightly on the earth. We don't want to be, we don't want to overpower anyone, right? And so then, and I think women, sometimes we internalize this in a way that it limits us. And so there's this concept of blameworthy modesty, right? And so what is blameworthy modesty? Well, blameworthy modesty is that which prevents one from denouncing the condemnable or from asking a question concerning a matter relating to their religion and the like, right? So blameworthy modesty makes us, well, I don't want to call this person out because I don't want to, I don't want to ruffle or make them feel bad or whatever, or call them into account. Maybe not call out, but call them into account when you should. And on the other hand, it's also when you shy away from getting information that you need in regards to your religion. And so Aisha, our mother, radiallahu anha, said, the best women were the women of the Ansar, because modesty did not prevent them from learning the religion. And then it goes on to talk about this, that the women of the Ansar were so, I don't want to say emboldened, but I would say they were so committed to the study of their religion and their aqidah and understanding their way of life, that they would ask the questions of the Prophet ﷺ, praise and peace be upon him, questions in regards to their menstrual cycle. And they would even, the prehistoric, not prehistoric, but the past version of a maxi pad, they would even be like, Ya Rasul, like, what do we do? Is this, sufficient? Such that he started to ask them, Aisha, can you please have a conversation with them? The point was that our mother Aisha radiallahu anha said that the best women were the Ansar for the reason that they did not let modesty supersede or even perceptions of what modesty or what a good little Muslim woman,
what lane she's supposed to be in, right? Yeah.
And supersede what they needed, the seeking of religious understanding. So I think that's a lesson that we can take from the past.
That's beautiful. And Dr. Dalia, I'd love to have, your take. What can we take from the past to make a hopeful future for women? You're muted, so if you could unmute yourself.
Gosh, you'd think the professor who teaches on Zoom knows how to work this stuff. Can you hear me better now? I put on
Yes, my son hasn't interrupted me multiple times, so it's okay. And I'm a professional at this.
So I teach a course on Islam and democracy, and it's very, so intangible for people to absorb that there was a democratic space, and we'll go back to the notion of space that existed at the advent of Islam. And if you really think about when with the Prophet and Rasul and Revelation, when he creates this first space called the masjid, and literally it's a space, it's not a structure yet, right? And the first to come into the fold of Islam are freed slaves or slaves, the poor, and women. Think about that space, that literal space of the masjid. Like I draw a line on the board, becoming the first democratic space to exist. And those that enter it first are women and the marginalized.
Incredible.
And from that moment, you have this paradigmic shift. I mean, we're talking about pre-Islamic Arabia, where girls were buried alive, women were possessed, there were exchange between tribes. We're talking about a complete paradigmic shift of the place of women in society, and of course in the eyes of Allah, but in their kind of value.
Right.
And if the first democratic space born into it was the importance of women, the reason why the women of Ansar was because they held on to that identity, and they said, "Ana min an-nas," I am from the people, right? And the revelation came to people, not to men, because that's the structure they were working against.
Yeah.
And so your professor, or I remember being young and going to the public library, and someone says to me, "They let you read?" Again. Wow. From a very kind of sweet perspective of, she has no idea that people that look like me are allowed to read or are given permission to do so. And I remember thinking, subhanAllah, when we talk about the rivers of Baghdad that ran black with ink when the libraries were burned,
yes,
those libraries were curated by women.
Yes.
The library, and so it's that kind of the fact that we don't know our history. We don't teach our history, but we've also allowed the modern day erasure to creep into how we even identify and study our history. And so even as women, as Muslims, we study the legacy of Muslim women during Women's History Month.
So how do we empower each other, Dr. Dalia? How do we empower each other, Professor, so that we are moving forward together lockstep and having men be a part of that allyship with us?
So I know we've said make space often. However, it's very important for women as we rise up to make sure that we create space for everyone to come with us. Structurally, the competition, they say, is, the world is zero sum. That, your victory is always at the expense of others, and bringing people up would be at my expense. But as women, it's almost incumbent upon us to bring up women with us wherever we go, right? So if you publish, you have an opportunity, you bring others along with you. But the other thing is, we tend to treat men as allies as a way to celebrate them. Why don't we hold them into account for their inability to ensure that women have the equity that was given to them by God, not by them? And so we celebrate allyship like they earned the gold star rather than they've done the bare minimum. And if we're going to talk about real freedom, right, like positive freedom, not negative freedom, we're still in the negative sense, right? We're still fighting of freedom from oppression, freedom from marginalization, freedom from erasure. We haven't gotten to the freedom to yet, because it's not because of our faith, but because of the social, economic, and racial, but really gendered structures that exist today, that we as Muslims have orientalized on ourselves and perceive that we have limits that actually don't come from our faith.
Beautifully said, very powerful. And Ndidi, what do you think is the best way forward to empower each other? Yes.
Yeah, so I think that kind of speaking to what Dalia said, Dr. Dalia said about, taking people with us, that conversation about we internalize so much, and so much is pushed upon us and said upon us and imbued upon us. There's this concept that there can only be one, right? There's only one great Muslim woman, speaker, leader, community person, and blah, blah, blah. There's a million, there's these programs and there's like a million brothers on there. They may have one or two sisters on there. And we buy into that, and then people start to rival with one another. There is Allah's earth is spacious. We look at we don't need to buy into this concept of scarcity. There's so much work to be done. Anything great that any of us accomplish is a blessing and a benefit to the ummah altogether, and society and to mankind. So I think just kind of just really encouraging people to understand that to stay away from a scarcity or a mind frame of lack, and understand that there's so much work to be done, and that the individual accomplishment benefits the whole. And then connecting to what Dalia was saying is that and just bringing people up as you climb, and helping your sister and helping others come as you climb.
Thank you. So beautifully said. And I think that's what Penny Peel USA did in trying to convene us to talk about this, because a lot of what they do is an attempt to empower women through, horticultural, skills, skill set, livestock gifts, domestic shelters, to give people a chance, to give people a fighting chance at another way, an alternative, creating an alternative source to empower women. So, I want to ask you, Dalia Mogahed, what do you think is one of the strongest ways that we can empower each other, to add to the beautiful comments that we've already heard?
It's hard to find something to add, honestly. I totally agree with everything said. I think we need to celebrate each other. I think we need to amplify each other's accomplishments. I read this article once, and it's a very simple strategy, but in a meeting, when you're with other women and men, oftentimes a woman's comment will just literally not be heard, and then be repeated by a man, and then it will be celebrated. I mean, I always thought that couldn't possibly be true, but as you start to notice it, it does happen a lot. So the way to address that is to actually literally repeat what your female colleague just said and say, wow, Ndidi just said the most amazing thing, and literally just say what she said again, because it's like they need to hear it twice to realize that it was said.
Yes.
But this kind of amplification of each other's ideas and successes, I think is incredibly important and powerful.
I read you had that as a post in one of your, I believe it was an Instagram post, and I thought it was so powerful when I read it, that as Muslims, we know that we have testimony of two women, right? And there's different interpretations of what that means. But I was thinking of it in terms of what you just said. When I read it, it like took me straight there. You need the testimony of two women. Why? Because it's like you're not gonna listen if one of them just says it to you. Like someone else has to amplify that. It's not because she's not inherently trustworthy. It's not because her idea isn't her own. It's not because she's not the author of her own idea. It's
not because two women equal one man.
It's not because two women equal one man, because we're inherently different, right? That's not what's happening. It's because God prescribed that because he understands the system in which we work.
Yeah, and in fact, this conversation came up with my late leader Imam Arthur Muhammad.
Yes.
They one of the women came during a public address, and she asked him, like, this concept of the two witnesses, like, what is that about? And does that mean that only two women equal one man? And it's interesting how people can internalize this, and based upon what their experiences are, what their communities are like, what their households are like, how people interpret and internalize some of this. And so, he was saying so that one can support the other, so that they can have comfort. Like, we're looking at a very patriarchal, hegemonic society at the time. You know what I'm saying? And so she might have needed the support from her sister, and protection.
Yes, and she's empowered, right? And suddenly maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll listen now. So, go ahead,
just one thing to add to that. Yasmin, you were mentioning the muhaddithat after we were both talking about muhaddithat. And as we all know, the muhaddithat don't have any, they are no different than the male, conveyors of hadith in the weight of their testimony for hadith. Something that is the foundation of our faith, not
very
like
good point.
Some, contract about land being sold or whatever, which is what you have, the one man, two women thing.
Right.
So the idea that it's because of being intellectually inferior or anything like that
or deficient, right?
Or deficient and requiring two should apply to something like hadith, which is now going to be applied for, the rest of time. And we base our faith in it. So I think it's an important point. And there's a whole paper on the norm. The exception is that you need two women and one man. That's the exception. The norm and what is much more common in Islam and in the Sharia is that witnesses are in a lot of other situations, it's one man, one woman.
Right. Thank you for that. And it was interesting that you said that about the hadith being, again, one woman is only really needed for that. And that it's not like an additional woman is needed to be a muhaddith, right? Or a narrator in a chain. It's so interesting because how I answered that judge on the panel, sorry, my son had walked in, so I lost my train of thought. But the way I answered that judge, and I knew I was going to lose the scholarship when I said this, I said, we Muslim women are the only authors of texts that become religious in practice, that affect law, that affect religious law. We are creating tradition. No one else is doing that. And she got offended. So I'm going to stop us right now really quick. And I want to see this awesome video that we have in our commercial break about a tribute to women. I'm really excited to watch this. So let's take a break right now to watch that. And then we'll be right back after these messages.
This is a tribute to the women around the world, to the mothers and the daughters who work day in and day out to find water for their families, who spend hours pulling water from open dug wells. And even when there's no well in their community, we know they'll still walk miles to find clean water because they are determined. At Penny Appeal USA, we ask, without these women, what would access to clean water look like? And for these villages, who would take on the responsibility to find water? Would the braided ropes make their way back to the bottom of the well? Who would ensure that the water is filtered and safe to drink for the kids? Without women, would the clay pots be emptied? And would the faucets run dry? And would the children go to school dehydrated and unable to learn? You see, with women, so much is possible. And only with women can we end the clean water crisis in our lifetime. Penny Appeal USA works with women by providing clean water access to communities around the world. By empowering women to have direct access to clean water, they spend less time carrying water and more time strengthening their communities. With a fresh water source, children in the community can focus on education and hygiene. You see, by empowering women, not only are we helping their communities, but we are tackling the water crisis directly. For just $35 a month, you can join the fight for clean water access by donating to Penny Appeal USA.
A beautiful reminder of what Penny Appeal USA is capable of with the support of all of you, viewers out there, with the support of our speakers who are giving their precious time to us, and their beautiful gifts that are coming from their heart, speaking from their heart. And you know, it's really the video is so powerful because you know, it's said that so much of the time that a woman has, that these young women especially have, is dedicated to getting water, you know, to moving that water, having the strength to move that water, having the resolve, the determination, like they said, the devotion, and the responsibility, quite frankly, the heavy responsibility. Without them, you know, without water, right, without that source, there is no life. And that's really kind of what, I think that's what we kind of want to talk about here, right? Like, without women, there is no life. We can't erase half of the population, at least, or the part that is required for life, right? To give life. You know, we obviously, we know that God is in control of our lives, and he breathes that life into the womb, but it has to go through the womb, right? It has to come from women. So, you know, I just want to remind people out here who are watching to see how big of a impact your $35 a month can have on empowering other women, right? And I know all of our speakers spoke about different ways that we can empower each other. And I just want to remind everyone that we are our greatest resource. So by amplifying the voices of women, by making sure that there's space that's created for them, by giving each other the love, right, and the cooperation, and seeing it from a place of abundance, as Ndidi says, not from a place of scarcity, but that your win is my win, your success is my success, and I have to celebrate you. I've got to champion you like that. It's not just here. It's not just on the tongue. It's got to be here in the heart. And then it's got to hit your pocketbook. Sometimes the pocketbook and the heart are in the same place. They shouldn't be. This should be in the hand. This has got to be in the heart. But when the heart is aligned, then the hand follows. So I hope that, inshallah, that we can learn from that and take the beautiful example from the video of seeing just how powerful and how many lives are affected when you make a very small donation in your life. I want to ask, you know, in our wrap up here in our time, and I don't want our time to end. I just want to spend all day learning and just like drinking the wisdom from your lips. That's how I feel when we're talking about water. I feel like you guys are giving us water right now. You're giving us life. What do you wish women would know about their worth? I'm going to start with Ndidi. What do you think, like, what do we need to communicate to women about their worth, their inherent worth?
That we are self-possessed of everything that we need to reach our highest potential in this life and the next, because Allah endowed it in us when He created us. I mean, I think
yes,
we have everything that we need. Allah has literally put in the embryo, in the fetus, and everything that we need. I don't think we need to. I think even in this conversation, I want us to be mindful of even like comparing ourselves in juxtaposition to men, because we exist differently. We're created differently. As Allah says in the Quran, not unlike the male, the females, not unlike the male, the male is not like the female. So, but we literally have everything, and we don't. The permission and the adhan that we need is whatever the permission Allah gives us, whatever our Prophet ﷺ gave us. That we are fearless and that we are bold, and that we don't, and not comparing ourselves or contrasting ourselves with men in terms of like, sometimes if you see one group that's in a powerful position and one that you feel is more likely to be subjected to oppression, then you want to aspire to the one that's powerful, right? And then sometimes women find themselves trying to do that and in process losing their femininity. And we don't need to lose our femininity. Like I said, we were very specifically created as we are to be created, and to embrace it, because everything that the way that Allah has made us has its strengths and its beauty and its and we have to access it. The other little points would be to look at our foremothers for strength and see what they did, that go all the way back, as we said, to our first mother, but all the way, look at Hajar, look at, the life example of Khadija radiallahu anha and the al-Mu'mineen. And even in more modern history, people like Sister Clara Muhammad, rahimallahu alayha, she really is, as we talked about in another discussion, the mother of the homeschool movement, because they wanted her to put her children in the school, and she said, she was absolutely not. We're treated like this, we're abused in this way, and you want me to trust you with our most precious resource, which is our children, and that is like So not only did the Claire Muhammad school system start the first was the beginning of the first Muslim school in the United States of America, but it was also the beginning of the homeschool movement. As she said, I will lie as dead as that doorknob before you take my children. So we are fearless, we are courageous. And when I think about the foremothers, people like my mother, people like the women who taught my mother, who brought her into the fold of Islam, who were Black women who in a foreign, in a country where people they abused you and debased you just based on the color of your skin. And then you're covering and you're wearing this garb, which is just looking completely foreign in the late 1930s and the early 1940s. You know what I'm saying? So when we're thinking about fearlessness, about even how we cover or how we present ourselves as Muslim women, we have to look and know the stories of those who came before us and see what they did and how they were able to be strong. And that will empower us.
What a beautiful example of Claire Muhammad, Allah yarhamha, and give her many, many blessings that continue, because we know, right, when we have a woman educate those children and those children educate, that's sadaqah jariyah. That is a continuous charity. So the hope is that those blessings are still reaching Claire Muhammad, inshallah, and that, rahimahullah, that her grave is illuminated with the light that she has sowed, and she has sowed those seeds of light. And, I want to know from your perspective, Professor Dalia, after those beautiful remarks of Ndidi, what do you want us to know about our worth as women? I would love to hear, because women are looking up to you, to this group of illustrious women, to really think, am I worthy of that? Can I be like that? And we have one here that's asked even, is there a book that you could recommend that I could read about empowering myself, feeling like, that that I have worth, that I have inherent worth. And I want you to unmute yourself because we want to hear every single drop of wisdom. Thank you, Dr. Dalia. We can hear you now.
I wasn't muted, or someone muted me. So first, the book. This month, and I'm going to give a plug to the Yasmin Institute, we're doing a series on women, and so far we've released 8 women from Islamic history, and their kind of bios, and it's not the kind of ones we've heard of. And so I would encourage everyone to go to the Yasmin website, sign up, and you'll get in your inbox, this kind of legacy of Muslim women historic contributions. And again, we tend to see the historic contributions as in some place over there. And I was really happy that Sister Ndidi talked about the Sister Clara Muhammad legacy in the United States, because we tend to erase the legacy of Islam in America, especially through the African American experience. And if you think about, for example, the legacy of slavery in the United States, and how many of the slaves brought to the United States were women, and that 20% of those women were actually Muslim scholars, and that they were the ones that held on to not just their Islamic identity, but the teachings of Islam, and continued to teach them when that was what they were actually being targeted and killed for, because they didn't want they didn't want slaves to teach one another, right? Or to continue their identity legacy from where they came from. They wanted the erasure of it. And it was those women who held on to it. And it's that legacy of Islam in America that we also tend to erase, right? We tend to talk about the Islamic history, but not the legacy of Islam in America here in the United States, especially the Black American experience, and how it is the forebearers of everything that's to come. Right. And so there's the first, the learning, but the second, the insistence on the lack of erasure. And I hate to keep going back to what I said at the outset, we have absorb the orientalization of the way we look at Islamic history in the United States, Islamic history period, but especially the legacy of Islam in the United States. And when it gets to worth, we apologize for taking the space that God gave us. We apologize for asking our worth in terms of compensation. We apologize sometimes for entering into what we perceive as acceptable male-dominated spaces when that's antithetical to our faith. And I think once we stop apologizing, that's when we start to reclaim our worth, if you will.
It's beautiful. And did you read anything, Professor Dalia, that led you to that? Is there something that you can point to that you feel like really helped you understand your God-given innate worth?
Yeah, so I have a couple of books on human rights in Islam. It began with me studying human rights, right, and what I teach, but then the legacy of human rights in Islam. And I was kind of floored, and I do this as a layperson in terms of the Islamic context of the ungenderedness of the language, right? Yes. And once you realize that it's ungendered, and then you juxtapose it with the legacy of women in the United States and the feminist movement, and how the struggle for rights still happens in a gendered sense. I mean, for God's sakes, this morning, the Violence Against Women Act, 173 Republicans vote against it, right? That women can't be protected, when we know that 35% of women throughout the world are victims of violence, right? Yeah. And so when we can't separate ourselves from the structures that exist in the United States and the challenges that exist. However, we need to understand the value of our faith in working to eradicate those social ills that exist here in this country.
Thank you, Professor Dalia. And I want to ask you, Dalia Mogahed, what do you want women to know about their worth from your perspective? And if there's any books that you would recommend that people can read to help illuminate this?
Well, I actually think that that's a book that needs to be written as well. What I want women to understand about their worth is, just going back completely to basics, is that when Allah says in the Quran, "Inni ja'alun fil ardi khalifa," He means you. You're not the Khalifa's support staff.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And you're not just the Khalifa's mother or wife or sister or daughter. And I think, and it might sound obvious when I put it that way, but we have been socialized truly to believe that our primary value stems from our ability to be a mother, a wife, a daughter, some accessory to someone else,
Right.
but not in our own right as first and foremost servants of God. And the second piece, and this is building on something Ndidi said, is we are not hormonally challenged men. We are an entirely
Thank you.
complete, perfect
Human.
for our purpose, created deliberately as we are. And the problem when we borrow too much from the so-called feminist movement is it is premised on the idea that men are the normal, sort of the normative standard.
Right.
And we are comparing ourselves to them. And we are trying to become them because they're the ones with all the power. And to critically, assess this model, because it's antithetical to the way that the Quran presents our value and our purpose, which is first and foremost as servants of Allah, as khulafa Allah fil ard, that we are his agents on earth, created to fulfill his will, not to become men in order to be valid or powerful. And then the third piece is you derive your worth from the fact that your rights are divinely ordained. This is huge. Divinely ordained. They are not gifts or charities from anyone else. They were not given to you by, a powerful male government, etc. There's something that no one can take away because they are your birthright as a human being and as a woman.
So beautiful. And, and I was just going to add in terms of books, I really like Khaled Abul Fadl's work on women. And I think they're beautiful works and kind of trying to see things. He's got a book called The Conference of the Books that is very beautiful. It talks about women, talks about the place of women, but he also has a Women in Islam book. But I also, I really like your sister's book, Dalia, Yasmin Mogahed's book, Reclaim Your Heart, because it's what I love about that book is that everyone should read it, but it's really about your worth as a human being. Who are you as a human being? Where are you going as a human being?
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. And I want to hear your perspective, Ndidi, because I didn't get to ask you your book recommendation. I'd love to know something that you feel like would be helpful to our audience to understand their worth.
Sure, absolutely. And so my book is not specific. This particular one that comes to mind, which was very revolutionary for me, particularly after my mom passed and I had to do a lot of healing, was this book. It's called Get Courageous Now, A Woman's Guide to Finding Her, A Woman's Guide to Finding Her Passion and Purpose in Life. And it's by Kiki Ramsey. She's a licensed social worker. She's also a Forbes speaker. It is a phenomenal book. And
the audience is lighting up because there's a lot of people who are agreeing with you.
It's a phenomenal book. And it is, it's for career women, it's for non-career women. And what it does is she starts it off with when she tells you all the people who she writes it for. I wrote this book for the person who's trying to lose weight, for who's trying to change her career, who's trying to, and some woman anywhere, any woman reading it can identify with one of the types.
Beautiful.
And then she talks about, she asks you, when was the earliest memory you felt of feeling courageous? And then she asks you, how old were you when you first felt fear? Right? Mm-hmm. What caused you to find fear? And what you do in this book is you just you work through it. There's a book and there's a journal. Mm-hmm. And you really just kind of explore because we all, as Dr. Bilal Ware reminded us, we don't come into this world with self-doubt and fear. The child tries, your son, your baby, he tries to get to walk, falls down, tries again, right? And so we are people of self-reproach, but when the reproach is such that it makes us doubt ourselves and stops us from doing good, then that's from Shaitan, right? Yes. What I love about this book is it helps you kind of assess, do a lot of self-analysis, and then you can work through it. So it's like a journey to yourself, to rediscovering your worth.
It's beautiful. Thank you for Kiki Ramsey's shouting out Kiki Ramsey's work. And I was just going to say, counseling, therapy, going to a licensed clinical social worker, talking to people who are specializing in trying to get you to uncover the layers that are sometimes preventing you from seeing your worth is also helpful and should be completely destigmatized in our societies. Those should be open to everybody and anybody. And the hope is that, we'll have increased healthcare for people in the United States to be able to access these important resources. We've almost come to the end of our time. And what I really want to ask you ladies, and I want to talk forever, but we only have 8 minutes. So I want to ask you the final question, which is, if you've looked at some of the programs that Penny Appeal USA has helped sponsor throughout the world and in the United States. So, for example, in the vegetable gardens in Pakistan, giving women the ability to have horticulture experience and training, the Brazil Women Empowerment Program there and helping run micro businesses for women and giving these micro loans for women, or the livestock gifts that are in Mali, in Africa, or Lebanon, in the Middle East, giving women the ability to resell products from livestock and make sure to have a little bit of a side income, or of course, locally with the domestic shelter here in the United States that they've opened up in Charlotte, North Carolina. How do you see these as propelling women forward? How can we stand with each other to propel women forward to a different kind of future? I will let whoever wants to talk first go.
I can start.
Yes.
Oh, I'm muted first. Sorry, Dalia. It propels women forward because it gives them a sustainable way to be economically free and independent. And that is huge. That opens up so many opportunities. And it also gives them a sense of safety and independence if they're in situations that aren't good, that they have an income and the ability, therefore, to potentially get out of those situations if they need to. But I love the idea of teaching people a skill, teaching people how to produce their own income rather than simply, making them, giving them money.
Right. Instead of throwing money at them, throwing money at a problem, it's teaching them how to solve their own problems. Right. And giving them the tools, because they're already empowered. But giving them the tools to have the dignity, right? The dignity to have those resources. Thank you so much, Dalia. And I want to ask you, Dr. Dalia, Professor Dalia, what is your take on these kinds of programs? Do they propel women forward? How do you think they propel women forward? Whether it be livestock gifts, domestic shelter support, or of course, different horticulture skills? Oh, you're muted. Unmute yourself. You muted yourself again.
Someone's playing with me. What we do know about women, especially women in war, is that they are the primary victims. If, for example, if we look at Yemen, according to UNICEF, the hunger situation in Yemen, 85% of the population is vulnerable. 85% of the population is hungry, and it's been that way since 2016. And Penny Appeal has been on the ground there since 2016. And we think about the most vulnerable. The reason why women are the most vulnerable because they're the most sacrificed at those critical moments. If we look at, for example, the water wells, talk about women, it's not just about bringing the water, it's about being the risk of the journey, right? Why is it that women are the ones placing the risk of the journey? And those water wells are not just about giving people water that Penny Appeal has throughout Africa, but it's really about, also eliminating that dangerous journey that women go on, girls go on daily. But
exactly.
Also, if we look at the domestic violence and those shelters, again, we know that 35% of American women will report violence from their partner. And around the world, 174 women die a day from violence of their partner. And it's not any one category, any one community, any one country. This is across the board.
One in three women globally.
For Penny Appeal to take this project on here in the United States is groundbreaking. While I know there's other organizations that do it, but for them to focus on that being the point of weakness here in the United States is really critical. And then if we go back to the micro-lending project, and this is something that we've learned from history, right? Is that, for example, if we look at the Grameen Bank model, 100% of those loans are paid back by women. That does not exist anywhere else. That 100% of microloans given to women, that money which gives them, for example, the ability to buy a couple of chickens and then sell the eggs, right? 100% return of those loans means that these projects not only change women's lives, they change community lives. And the integrity, right? Because we're not talking about women that want to hand out, they want to hand up.
That's right.
And when we look at it like that, that's why you have 100% repayment of loans, right? Because it's not about the handout. And so all 4 of those projects that Penny Appeal has committed to, right, not just have long-lasting effects, but are not the kind of, as I said, the negative, getting people out of the violence, right? But empowering them to the freedom to realm. And that's really important. It's not about the water well for water, but about the protection of the journey and the elimination of the violence.
It's so beautiful. That's that positive empowerment that you're talking about. It's a positive empowerment. It's protecting those young women on the journey where they could be assaulted. It's also protecting that time that they're not in school, that they're not able to, to basically propel themselves forward because they're stuck doing water. So this is the way to propel them forward. And I'll let you and Ndidi have the last word here. How do you think that these programs really, propel women forward into the future?
Well, Professor Fahmy said made all the points I was going to make, so I think she said it most eloquently. My education is in finance, and so one of the things that we studied in microfinance, in the microfinance concept, was that in countries that are considered less developed countries, where you educated women and where you gave them opportunities for business, the whole communities flourished, right? The whole communities flourished because women are the mothers.
Yeah.
And even the ones who don't birth children from their bodies, they're the teachers and the educators and all of these different folks. So it in the end, they have to make sure that it's done well, because they have to make sure that their families are taken care of, right? And so in the end, we know that they fare very well in these programs. And I do love the importance of the program in Charlotte, because it's so critical to be contributing right where, right in the country, in the spaces where we're taking benefit ourselves.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So beautifully said. And thank you, Professor Dalia, to Dalia Mogahed, to Ndidi, Okakpu, for your amazing insights. And what's so interesting about what you said, Professor Dalia, this is, when you were saying 100% of women are returning those loans, right, that Ndidi's talking about, because they've got a stake in the game. And it's that hand up, right? It's that resources. I'm going to give you the resources, and I'm not going to stop with me. It's what Dalia Mogahed is saying. It's amplifying the other woman. By paying back that loan, I'm amplifying another woman to take from that savings collective, right? To be able to get that micro business loan. So, just as incredible as 100% of women hadith scholars, of those involved in narration chains being truthful, 100%. It is just as amazing, isn't it? A future full of possibility, as we stand on your shoulders, as the next generation stands on your shoulders, and we're standing on the shoulders of giants before us. Thank you so much for illuminating the legacy of female leadership in Islam by being you, and by giving hope to the future generations, giving us the light that you are sowing into the future. May it be a continuous charity for you. May it be sadaqah jariyah for you. All of the words that you have said, all of your intention, may it be counted as ibadah. May it be counted as worship for all of you, the time that you have spent. And for those of out in the audience who are listening, may it also be that for you. And I hope that the audience finds it in their heart and in their spirit, so that their hand can be controlled, right? That their hand can be moved by their heart and their spirit to give to such a program, to propel other women forward as well, to pay it forward. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, Penny Appeal USA. And inshallah, we meet again, hopefully in person. May all of you who are, have suffered loss from COVID-19, may you be healed. May your loved ones, inshallah, be counted as martyrs. May they have the highest level of jinan. And may we hopefully eradicate this difficulty so that we can hug each other once again. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace be upon you.